So, welcome everyone to this talk on shamanism as a spiritual path. And we have been looking forward to talking about this topic for quite a long time. And here, where we are now, it's heading towards midwinter in Scandinavia, the dark time, the dreaming time. And it feels like a wonderful time to talk about this and what it means to us. And we'll be talking about our own experiences, about what being on a shamanic path and a spiritual path means to us. And we've both been on it for a while, I guess about 15 years for me and nearly 40 for you now, consciously, and maybe much longer, not so consciously. And in a way, we have all been on our path since the day we were born into this life, and maybe even long before. So you're all really welcome. And we have a lot of different things we'd like to talk about. And we're going to talk quite generally to begin with. And then we're going to start spiraling and talk about some specific things that we have found helpful when you're actually on a path, things to look out for, to recognize, so that you know that when they happen to you, you're not kind of failing or crazy. It's just a natural part of the path. But I guess I want to start because Jonathan, I remember many years back, you talking a lot about how it changed for you when you realized that working shamanically was more than a set of techniques to you.
Yeah, and that realization, it came with sort of a bang, shall we say, but I somehow knew it without knowing it long before, because for me, my realization that the shamanic path was the spiritual path that I'd been looking for all my life. Strangely enough, I had this realization sitting in a library at New York University in 1972 when I was writing a term paper about shamanism. And for a long time, I had been aware of the fact that I wasn't interested in becoming rich. I didn't want to go out and get some job that was going to make me a millionaire. I wanted to find out about the truth of life. And for me, that didn't have so much to do with materialism, and it did have something to do with spirit, and I didn't know what any of those things meant, but I knew at the same time. And so there I was in the library reading an article about a shaman called Henry Rupert, who was a shaman of the Washoe people. And in the early and middle part of the 20th century. And I had a eureka moment, and I said, this is it. This is what I had been searching for all my life. And okay, my life wasn't so long at that point. I was only 30 years old. But I'd experienced some stuff. I was a war veteran and also a human being, and you don't live 30 years without experiencing a lot of things. And so it hit me very, very hard and very heavy. And that was in 1972, sort of not quite the peak of flower power. The flowers were starting to wilt a little bit, maybe. But it was a very special time. And I had no idea at that time how I, a white guy sitting in a library working on my master's degree in New York City, how I could even think about becoming a shaman. And it wasn't that I really wanted to become a shaman at all. It was that I knew that there was something about this path that spoke directly to my heart. And I also knew that I had been looking since I was 16 years old and read Hermann Hesse's wonderful book, Siddhartha. And that was when the first penny dropped, and I said, yes, yes.
In fact, you never really set out to be a shaman. You set out more to make sure that you would have a life where you felt sort of present and connected, right?
Well, yeah, and well, things sort of got a little bit turbulent after I got my master's degree because I wrote this paper about shamanism, and I realized that not only did I not want to make $1 million, I didn't really want to be an anthropologist either. And but it was I could feel the paper was written by a wonderful anthropologist. His name is Don Handelman. And it was so apparent that this young anthropologist who did this research with Henry Rupert and lived with him, and Henry Rupert wanted him to be his apprentice, in fact. And Don wanted to be an anthropologist and is an amazing anthropologist. The things he writes about are so deep in spirit. He maybe he did become a shaman. Yeah, who knows? Uh, Somebody will have to ask him, but I think I know what he'll say. Anyway, yeah, uh, I went on, and my life became rather turbulent because I was searching for a path I didn't know how to find, and um, shortly after the turbulence began, I realized that I really wanted to find the connection, the true connection to life. We're all alive, but at that point in my life, I knew I was physically alive, but I knew there was so much more. I knew there was so much more to life. And so that was an interesting tornado that I walked in for about 8 years. Yeah.
And I think for me, as you're speaking, Jonathan, you're reminding me that I didn't even really know that there was such a thing called a path when I began. I didn't really know of that idea exactly. I had an idea that there was things that could happen in my life, but the idea of a path, because I began from a very different background. I began from a background of creative practice in writing and film, and with very little connection to so-called spiritual worlds. And so I had a lot of ideas about a lot of things. And in a way, I felt that much later, I felt that I did all that creative work as a way to keep alive until I could finally find my way to the spirits. And so I guess it was quite some years until I started thinking about being on a path. And so this is an interesting thing for me. It was never something that I had this idea that I should be on a spiritual path. And there it is over there. Look, here's this road sign pointing in this direction. It was never like that for me. And the path just appears. And suddenly we look down, and there we are standing on it. And I think, how did I get here? And how did it get here? And then when I found myself on it, um, it wasn't so much that it changed overnight, but my relationship to the spirits and to the work changed. So I wasn't really actually looking for it. But when it came gradually, it came through this deepening understanding of what the spirits meant to me in my life. Again, really nothing to do with wanting to work for other people or be seen in any particular way. Also, just coming to this work because I really needed a lot of deep healing and really wanting to be more fully in life. And as I did that personal work for many years, I really fell in love with the spirits. I think that's it for me, really. I really fell in love with them. And I know that it's very different in different traditions. And some people say, the spirits are not your friends, but for me, they really are. They're most incredibly loving, kind, compassionate, patient, understanding, wise, brilliant, fun, outrageous people I know, apart from Jonathan. He's also kind of up there. And many more people, I'm sure. But the spirits were really something special for me. They really saved my life. And I felt incredibly grateful to them. I mean, just so deeply grateful for them, not only for helping me survive, but helping me actually come alive. And so it was some years after that that I began to sort of have this notion of, oh, am I on a path now? And well, what is that then? And what does that mean? And through the years, many people that I've worked with, we've talked about this, am I on my path? And often we think that it's very easy to think that the path is way ahead there, somewhere. It's in the future, but it's right here. And it's not always that we have to find our way to it. It's that we have to find ourselves on it.
Mm.
And just take time to stop and look down and say, where am I and what is this? And then there are lots of other things that we're going to talk about today that make it a path: the choice, the commitment, the challenges, the dedication. It's not that necessarily where you go is different, though it will be. It's how you relate to it that actually makes the path fully show itself and flourish and welcome you as well as you welcome it.
Gosh, there are so many things that you said now that I was about to remark on. We're all on a path from the moment we're born, right? And as you said, maybe a long time before. But until we know that, well, we might as well not be on a path, but we are. Our path goes through life anyway. And it is so interesting because I think that a lot of people don't think about that, as you were saying.
Mm.
And it's not until they have an experience or a series of experiences that that brings this awareness to them. And in anthropology, they call it an initiatory experience, an experience which initiates you, which starts you.
Simply means to begin.
To begin, it starts you on this realization that you have a path. And then it asks the question, what are you going to do about it? And somebody asked this question in the chat column there. What about the connection between creativity and shamanism and the shamanic path? And for me, there's no question about it that there's more than a common field or a connection. They have everything to do with each other. And I had been practicing shamanism in what I refer to as a disciplined way. And we'll talk more about that a little later on,
Mm.
too. For several years, when a book called uh, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by somebody called Betty Edwards was brought to my attention. And I devoured this book. And it was so fascinating for me because she talks about how an artist in the middle of their creative process has a shift in consciousness. And this is exactly how I talk about when the shaman steps into the spirit world. It's by a shift of consciousness. And there are a lot of ways of making the shift of consciousness, and uh, alcohol uh, causes our consciousness to shift, and a lot of drugs cause our consciousness to shift. And experiences can also uh, cause our consciousness to shift. But this so interesting with the artist, and I don't just mean the graphic artist or the sculptor, also writers, and
Musicians.
musicians,
Mm.
all kinds of
Dancers.
artists, dancers.
Mm.
You can dance your way into the spirit world, right? So the connection is absolutely there.
And in a way, my personal feeling is that way back in the beginning, all art was sacred and was done for sacred purposes. And so the drawing, the storytelling, the dances, the songs, um, the pottery, they were all um, sacred practices to get into touch with the spirit world. And it was only later on that they became separated from that and seen as, a craft or a creative practice or an education or a job or an entertainment.
Or an individual gift.
Yeah.
Right?
And they were really often communal practices that helped us all to get in touch with the spirit world.
Mm.
And I guess for me, what I realized was, in a way, the path I'm on now, I've been on for a really long time, long before I knew it, and long before I practiced so called disciplined shamanism. And one thing I really love about getting older is looking back and seeing how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Even though when I was younger and going through them, I was thinking, gosh, it feels like I'm just jumping all over the place. And then one by one, they just fall into place. So,
It's wonderful.
mm,
Yeah. And looking back, it's such a uh, interesting pastime
mm,
uh, because the penny drops
mm,
a lot,
mm,
and you can almost see certain moments. You can almost see certain moments, and looking back, I can see uh, deep spiritual experiences and totally unexpected moments of my life. For example, the very moment I officially became a soldier,
mm,
right? I experienced massive soul loss, right? Which uh, was a great gift. It allowed me to get through 2 pretty terrible
mm,
years, right? And even though it took that piece of soul 20 years to get back home again, when it came home again, it was, shall we say, a joyous reunion,
mm,
life changing experience. And there were several other experiences, and again, these initiations that we go through. And at the time, we might not even realize it's an initiation. And I'm sure that probably all of you who are listening to us now and listening to what we're saying, you can think of many initiations in your own lives We don't get to be 30 years old or 40 years old or 50 years old without going through things that change our life. And if we're given the opportunity, or if we're wise enough to embrace these initiatory experiences, perhaps an automobile accident, right? Or perhaps falling in love, right? Or perhaps anything, seeing the way the sun reflected off the water in the bay could also be an initiatory experience. And and it can be very wonderful to go back and look at these moments in your life. And when you get to be more than middle aged, what happens is that these are the moments that you really remember, right? And sometimes they cause you to blush and you think, oh my God, how could I ever have done that, right? Look a little deeper, look a little deeper. Somebody was trying to tell you something. Right?
And a bit later on in this talk, we're going to be looking more at thresholds and initiatory experiences. But before we get there, and I like this thing about that it's good sometimes to stop and look back from where you've come and see it with fresh eyes, you know, not just the events of what's happened to you, but really look at it, really look at how every single thing has led you to where you are right now, and how that might be a really wonderful path, even though maybe taken one at a time, they weren't so wonderful, but they're all part of your path in one way. And to really accept that can be a very deep and powerful experience.
Can be very healing, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily accept what happened as a right thing. I don't mean that if it's been very traumatic, but you accept yourself. You accept yourself. And there was some years ago, I was going through a very big phase in my life, and one of the pieces of work my spirits told me that I had to go and revisit. I had to be able to walk through my whole life, right up to the point that was at that point then, and I had to be able to stand with myself in every single part of the path. I didn't have to enjoy it. I didn't have to celebrate it. I just had to be able to stand with myself, to see it, to look it in the eye and accept it as that's part of who I am, and that's part of where I've been and where I am now. And it was a very powerful experience. It brought me really fully into the moment and even more fully into myself. So, but I wondered, Jonathan, like, was there a time when you realized that you were on a spiritual path, or when you realized shamanism was more to you than techniques, or how did this come to you?
There are how many points?
Yeah.
I just want to pick up where we just were for a moment, because I came to, as you were speaking, remember a very powerful experience that I had one time. And it was before I started practicing shamanism in a disciplined way. But it was a sign for me that I knew that I was on the right path. And I had been to a concert with the incredible musician. And no, it was not at all. It was Don Van Vliet, Captain Beefheart, right? Some of you remember Captain Beefheart. And it was an amazing concert. I went with a very good pal of mine. And I came out, and I was in a slightly altered state of consciousness because of this amazing music and poetry, right? And so I stepped off a street corner to cross the street, But what I didn't notice was that I was stepping into a red light for me, and there was a taxi cab trying to make it across the intersection before the light turned against him. And somehow or another, I ended up sitting on the bonnet or the roof, not the roof, the hood of his cab, looking through the windshield at his very green face, about 10 meters beyond the point where I had been standing. And what I had experienced was that I was lifted up in the air and placed on the bonnet of his taxi cab. And I experienced being lifted up and put down. And in that very moment, I knew that I was on the right path. I was taking my time. I was making a lot of wrong turns, wrong in quotation marks, but I was on that path. And very shortly after that, I was introduced to some very simple techniques that helped me to shift my consciousness. I was able to stop doing all drugs, all everything. I even stopped drinking for 20 years or something. And it was very wonderful. And I started off learning techniques. And I had very powerful experiences. And for the first 2 or 3 years, I thought that this is really great. It's really changed me. I'm not the same person as I was even 3 years ago. I am the same person, but I'm entirely different. Things are moving. But I always had this doubt. Am I just making all of this up? These beautiful spirit helpers who come to me. Is this just a figment of my imagination? And then all of a sudden, something happens which our friend, I can't remember his name now, this good old psychiatrist, the friendly one.
Jung.
Jung, that's it.
The friendly one.
The friendly one. Jung, he called them what? Synchronicities.
Mm-hmm.
Synchronicities. What I used to call coincidences. I call them miracles now. Right. When things start to happen in such a way that you cannot deny the existence of the spirit world. Because this is how the shaman works. The shaman works by moving into the spirit world and asking for help. Asking for help to change. And one of these miracles, I just tell about it. Like a lot of middle-aged adolescents, I was having a really difficult time with my parents. They didn't know anything about my shamanic work at all. But we were just, it was at an all-time low. And all of a sudden, I found myself asking the spirits for help to have a better relationship with my parents. And as soon as I said it, I thought, what's all that about? I don't want a better relationship with those jerks, They don't care about me, blah, 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 all the typical adolescent stuff. Two days later, I found myself putting down the telephone. I had just called up the airline company in Copenhagen and reserved a ticket to fly to America so I could be at their 50th wedding anniversary. And then I thought, what did I do that for? It's going to be terrible. They're going to get after me for being a hippie bum and blah, blah, blah. Right? Went there and just had the most wonderful time with my parents that I'd had since I was 12 years old. And this was a sign. This was a sign for me that yes, yes, it's not all my imagination. Something is really deeply happening here. And and that was when I knew that it was just totally beyond techniques. The secret of shamanism is the shaman's relationship with her or his spirit helpers. That is the secret of shamanism. It's nothing to do with techniques. Techniques help. They're great. But the essence is the shaman's relationship to the spirits.
And hearing you talk, I'm reminded of that being on a spiritual path, whether it's through shamanism or any other thing, it doesn't always have to be a really dramatic journey. It can sound very grand to be on a spiritual path, but I actually find it a very, very personal thing. You know, when I think of being on a path with my spirits, it's not really about how it looks to other people or um, even where it takes me. It's really about this incredibly deepening relationship and that we work together. And I want to say a little bit more about that because I feel that that's really what being on a path meant for me when I first kind of started thinking about it more and realizing it, and what it's certainly what it means to me now, that being on a path is not, as the old saying goes, a destination but a journey. And so it's not about grand gestures or big work, but it's about that in my everyday life, you know, when I cook or I go for a walk or I go to bed, I have my spirits with me. I make room for them in my life. So that this is a completely different way to be than if I live my life here and then I think, oh, now I want to go and do a piece of shamanic work, either for myself or for someone else. So whoop, I jump over here, you know. For me, it's like it's all just here. And of course, it doesn't mean that I'm sort of floating around, you know, spaced out all the time. In fact, it means the very opposite, I think, being much more present and focused and aware. But it means that I want to make room for them in my life all the time, that they are my constant companions. They are the people I turn to, you know, not just for work. It's not like I go to the shamanic office. I live a shamanic life. You know, I talk to them every day and I say, how are you doing? Or how am I doing? Or what do you think I should be aware of today? And if there is anything you want me to know, give me a little nudge, you know. And if weird things happen, I say, like, what happened here? Or like, come and help me. Or, you know, they're like my constant companion. And that doesn't mean that I'm having this super open shifting consciousness all the time, but it does mean that I have a kind of slightly expanded um, not even awareness, but connection. And I want them in my life. That's the key thing. I want them in my life. And I invite them in my life. And I'm joyful that they're in my life. In fact, I don't know what I would do without them
No.
because they're just so great, you know?
Yeah.
And so I want to say also that um, sometimes being on a path can be this big, grandiose thing. And it shouldn't be about anybody else. It should be about you and your relationship to your spiritual practice, whatever it may be. That's what matters, you know. And and you don't have to have anybody else define it for you or what it means. What it means is if it feels true and right for you. Is there like a deeper commitment? And we're going to talk about commitment more in a little while.
What you said was really interesting, and you mentioned a word 2 minutes ago, and for me, this is another key word in spiritual practice, and especially in shamanic spiritual practice, I think, and that is connection. And when I decided to drop my academic career, I had this experience of free floating, and it was disorienting, to say the least. And that went on for a couple of years. And it wasn't until I started really trying to find how to make the shamanic connection, right, that I started to be a little bit grounded. Right? And it wasn't until I did make connection with my spirits, my spirit teacher, and some other helpers, that I began to really feel connected instead of feeling like a leaf blown around in a hurricane. Uh, I know some of you have experienced this. And so, for the first time in years, I started to feel very grounded, which might seem like a contradiction in terms. But then, as I went on with my shamanic practice, uh, I realized that people often talk about the shaman as the bridge between the spirit world and the physical world. And part of being that bridge is having your feet on the ground and your head in the clouds, right? That's another way of looking at it. And bringing that power down and bringing that power up, right? And being right there in the middle, uh, where you meet it, where
Mm.
it meets you.
Being the trunk of the tree.
Being the trunk of the tree.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I'd like to pick up on a couple of these comments in the chat, about really feeling that maybe at some point you feel like you almost give yourself to the spirits, and what happens when you do that. And this can happen in many different ways. And traditionally, in many cultures, the shaman is the servant both to the spirits and to the community, both at the same time. And it's that's how the work uh, happens, because we're servants both to the spirits and to the community,
Like the trunk of the tree.
like the trunk of the tree.
Mm.
But I spent some years really feeling into this, what this really meant to me, and also seeing it working with many people. And this is something I really encourage all of you to feel deeper into what that means to you, because there are many ways to look at that. And I find that some people have a tendency to more to treat the spirits as their servants, because they go when they want things and say, can you give me this and this and this and this, even if it's very good things, that you need. And then other people tend to like just sort of prostrate themselves and say, oh, great spirits, please just tell me what to do. And that can also be a beautiful thing. But for me, I feel that there is a balance and a flow that incorporates both those things. And many years ago, my spirits taught me my relationship with them, that they are not my slaves and I am not their slave. And they use this word very specifically, um, to understand that service, how service and slavery is different, that I always have a choice and they always have a choice. And so, what is it that keeps bringing us together, right? It's because we choose to. We choose to come together. We choose to work together. Even if I have made a commitment, I still always have a choice every time, every day. And making a really committed, clear, conscious choice with a joy in our hearts is one of the most powerful things we can do in life. And in my experience, when I work with the spirits, it's not that they have to sort of get hold of me and drag me along and get me to do stuff, because they don't think that that really works so well. Sometimes they might give me a bit of a shove, you know, but it's the thing that I come to the work together with them with like a huge yes in my heart, even if it's my yes, oh my God, how can I do this? But yes, 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 yes. And every time I'm on the brink of uh, going into another phase or on the brink of doing a big piece of work, I take a moment and reconnect with that place of yes in me, that place of choice, that place where I remember why this is something that I, not only that I'm meant to do or should do or have to do, it's something that I love to do, that I want to do. There's nothing else that I'd really rather do when it comes right down into it, when I sink into the root and remember that this is actually my choice and this is what I choose.
As I remember, I in the beginning, what you're saying really reminds me of this, because shortly after this time, when I realized it wasn't just me making something up, but something that was really happening, uh, I stepped into it. I surrendered. But I didn't really realize I had surrendered until one morning when I was doing my morning ritual, saying hello, saying thank you, saying help, saying what can I do. That all of a sudden, uh, three of my dearest spirit friends were sitting on the ground in front of me and looking up and saying, "Now you have given yourself to us." And it was just so clear cut and undeniable what they were saying. And I started to faint. I started to fall over backward, right? And my teacher was behind me. And he grabbed me, or rather, he kept me from falling. And he put me on my feet and he said, "Don't worry. We have given ourselves to you." And it is about surrender. It is about surrender. And uh, the thing that a lot of people are afraid of in this word is they think that surrender is giving up power, right? They think of the military.
Losing freedom.
Losing freedom. I lost the war, whatever, I surrender. I give up, right? Surrender is not giving up in the spirit sense, because when you surrender to the spirits, when you surrender to life, when you surrender to the power of love, you are filled with that power. You are filled with that power. There's nothing you have to protect yourself from anymore. So many people are worried about protection. But when you fill yourself with love, when you fill yourself with spirit power, when you fill yourself with the power of the universe, of course you can die. You can die at any moment, right? And you will die. We all will, physically. But when you're filled with the power, well, that's what they meant in the old days when they said, today is a good day to die. Right? You're filled with power.
And so this, what you're describing this moment for you
Mm.
in your path, um, this moment of mutual surrender. And I think it's interesting that so often in our lives here in the society I live, anyways, is language is rife. It's filled with war and battle making metaphors. And so we often think of these things as surrender in only a battle way. But when we surrender to each other in love, that's like this real coming together, then we're really strong together, you know. And that means that we can really trust each other because we have given something very deep to each other. It's not just this kind of thing. Oh, do you think you can come over? Well, I don't know. I'll see if I've got something more interesting to do. It's not that. It's this like, can you come over? I'm right there. So there you are together. And the more you walk and work on your path, the more this relationship gets really strongly knitted together. And it will be tested sometimes. And we'll talk about that in a little while as well. But that is really it for me. And so when people talk about making a commitment or agreement with the spirits or a pact, it's not for magic purposes as such. I mean, it is magic, but it's really about this. It's like a commitment, just like a marriage is a commitment. If you really think about why you're doing it, why are you giving yourself to each other? Not to lose yourself, but to gain strength in the connection so that you can really trust each other. You can really rely on each other. As we say in English sometimes, they've got your back, right? They're right there for you, right? So, um, thinking about this, about how you might want to make this kind of agreement with the spirits, there are several ways of doing that. And should we talk about that now or a little bit later? You want to say some things first?
Well, I mean, we are talking about
Yeah.
it. We've been talking about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of you brought up a very interesting thing in the chat column about, are our lives our own? Right? Now, being brought up in America, this is really the land of individualism, good old John Wayne and all that kind of thing. And none of us would be here if it wasn't for everything else. That's just the way it is. We are a part of the whole. And one time I was talking with my teacher, and he's, I was complaining about something or another, and somebody doesn't appreciate me. I go out and I do all this, and I don't get any gratitude, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, that happens to everyone, right? So, well, it happens to me anyway. Probably doesn't happen to you, but it happens with me. Anyway, so my teacher, he's wonderful, and
Your spirit
my
teacher.
spirit teacher, and he sits there and he listens, and then he gets this little smile on his face, and he says, uh, you are the center of the universe. And I looked at him, He said, no, you really are. You are the center of the universe. And, then I could feel myself getting inflated as like somebody was pushing up the Jonathan balloon, blowing it up, right? And then he looks at me and he's got this other little smile he gets, and he says, you are a grain of sand on the beach. And my head exploded. It was so wonderful because I realized that both things were absolutely true, right? And uh, the way I was brought up to think originally was that if one thing was true, then the opposite could not be true, right? But as it turns out, the longer I experienced life, the more I'm absolutely sure that just because one thing is true, it probably means that the other is just as true, and they fit together so beautifully.
So this is great because you like to say that the logic of the spirit is sometimes so-called paradoxical, but it's,
Mm,
I think it's just much bigger than our brains can process sometimes.
mm.
And they encourage me anyway to just keep expanding my understanding, you know. And so I just wanted to say one more thing about this, about giving yourself to the spirits and them giving themselves to you. And also, this is not something you can really force, I feel. You know, it's not something like, right now, I've been working with you for 3 years or 3 months. So come on, bring it on. This is something that develops in its own time. It doesn't follow a timetable. You know, it's not like, well, I know people who've been working for 10 years and they have no interest in working for anyone else. And they just want to have a low key practice that they love. And then there are people who are working for 2 years that sort of explode into it. And it's not about, you know, looking at your spiritual CV and counting the years, you know, but it can be easy to get into that. And it's not about that. It's about how you feel about the relationship and how are you going to be working with them and the amount of space and time you're going to make for them in your life, right? And so part of being on a spiritual path for me also means that because it's about us both, right? Then sometimes it might be that it's not just about them being there for me. It might be that I'm sometimes being there for them. And this might seem strange that such mighty beings as the spirits really would need us, but I feel they do. They need us to be here and be in life and be on the earth and be connected and together. Not to do their work, but to do our work, our joint work.
To do the work.
The work, yeah. And so occasionally, then, if I'm on a spiritual path, it's remembering it's not all about me. It is about me, but it's not all about me. And so then I also take time out sometimes and say, so is there anything I can do for you now? What is it that you need from me today? And again, feeling this balance. So it's not all one way. It's not all like, oh, I give everything up for you and please, you know, just tell me how to live my life. It's more about, because then I'm not making any choices. I'm not taking any responsibility. And the spirits can't take responsibility for my life. They can guide me and teach me and help me, but I have to take responsibility for my life and my choices.
It's true, and what a wonderful gift that is.
Mm.
I mean, this is it. When you finally get to this point, because I think, in fact, I know that a lot of people, when they start to practice shamanism, uh, they want the spirits to be their servants, right?
Or they want the spirits to tell them everything.
Or they want the spirits to tell
Mm.
them to do everything, right? Every little thing. What kind of toilet paper should I buy? You know, really. And of course, it's not like that. It is a beautiful partnership, and it is a deep, beautiful relationship. And I remember one time where another time when everything changed for me, and it was when I was again sort of a little bit concerned about my father, who was getting very old, and sometimes our relationship wasn't as easy as it had started to become. And these were generally shorter periods because of a lot of things. But my teacher said to me one day, you know, your father is not your father. And, you know, I was just about to say, well, enough, right? I think we've been working together long enough and it's been great until now, but goodbye. But I didn't say that. I was so shocked at the same time. And I said, what? Because if any of you knew my mom, then you would know that this is just absolutely out of the question, right? Not a chance. Right? She was old school. And I turned to my teacher and I said, "What?" And he said, "Your father is not your father." And I was just speechless. And then he looks at me and he says, "I am your father." And that was just the beginning all over again. You know, I feel that our life goes in it's like a spring, the old fashioned springs that used to have old spring beds, right? These coil springs, they call. You think you're going around in a circle, but when you get back to the starting point, you realize, oh, the countryside looks a little different now. It's the same, but it's different. You're starting to see things in a different way. And that was one of those points. That was one of those points.
And that leads perfectly into the next section, really, because we want to start talking a bit more now about some specific aspects of a path as we've experienced it. And talking about thresholds, talking about ceremonies, stepping stones, these kind of things. And so, one thing that happened to me, in fact, happened quite a few times. And the first time it happened, it was extremely um, uh, worrying for me, which is that I found myself going in this circle. And I've been practicing some years quite deeply, and all of a sudden, I can't really explain why or how, but all of a sudden, I started feeling like I had lost connection. I didn't have such a deep connection. I couldn't hear the spirit so well. And I suddenly felt like I was sort of free floating around. And this actually went on for several months. And it wasn't just like no connection, but it was really like maybe at a volume of 2 instead of 85, you know. And it was really very disconcerting for me. And my first thought and my second and my third and my 15th thought was, oh my God, it's all over. I've failed. They've deserted me. All these kind of things. And it's a very long story, and I won't tell the whole story here. But eventually, what happened after a few months was that I stopped panicking, and so that I could begin to hear them again. And the best way that I can describe it, I don't know if this is literally what happened, but this is how it feels to me now, is that they had been speaking to me maybe at this louder volume, and then they turned the volume down. It's like they're just whispering. And so I had to listen very carefully to hear them. And then I finally got it. It's like, oh, you're teaching me to listen more deeply. Yes. Oh, okay, let's go. And then off we went on another few years of a cycle, right? And it was just like this revelation to me. Oh, it wasn't like broken. It wasn't the end. It wasn't wrong. It was just, now they're saying, one of my teachers specifically, she said, now you're ready for the next bit. Now we're going to teach you in a different way. And they've done this with me about 4 or 5 times over the years, where all of a sudden I think, oh my God, it's not working anymore. And then suddenly, because every time it gets just as scary, but every time I also remember, oh yeah, I remember this what happened before. So I remember to just calm down and stop and listen, and sort of really listen with all my senses and say, okay, what's going on? What is it that you want me to pay attention to? Like, I'm here, you know. And then eventually they say, good. So now we're going to teach you about this. Now we're going to shift, you know, and it's literally like going through different um, grades in school, you know, where they say, good, you know how to do this now. So now, okay, start again in this way. And actually, it's very joyful, I think. And I don't know if this is very much my own experience, but I think it's actually a very common experience in life in general with learning things and also with deep practices. that we come back to this so-called beginner's mind, or to the place where we feel like maybe we lost it all. And that can be a very powerful place to be. And it's also a place of initiation, because it's a place where you have to choose, am I going to trust this? Do I want to stay on the path? Do I want to be with my spirits even though I can't hear them for 3 months? If you still say yes, what a powerful place that could be.
It's it is a very common thing, I feel.
Mm.
And I think part of it is related to the fact that in our culture, anyway, there's a huge emphasis placed on doing,
Mm.
right? And so it's so empowering and exciting and exhilarating to be working together with your spirits and really, really moving and really doing something and really getting somewhere, right? But this is why it's also very common in many spiritual practices to have a retreat. And okay, militarily, retreat means going back, right? But in the
Running
spirit,
away.
running away.
Yeah.
In spiritual practice, retreat means just stop and be here. Be here. You think you're suffering. You are not suffering. You just need to stop and be here. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to listen. Just stop. This is why people go off and sit in the mountains for 4 days. And okay, maybe you get a vision, or maybe you don't. But in any case, you come down from the mountain after 4 days changed. Doesn't have to be a mountain, it can be a beautiful desert. Just take plenty of water with you, right? It's okay. I know the Indians, they didn't take any water. Take some water, especially if it's the desert and it's summertime, right? But no, seriously, sometimes it's necessary to just stop and enjoy the stopping. Now, it seems that our beautiful planet wants us to stop, right? And it's been going on for a while now that we've been aware of it since January or February, right? And some of us are getting a little, cabin fever, maybe, even if you live in New York City, right? You want to go out and do things and party, and up, now they've closed all the restaurants and cafes. You're just going to have to sit at home. Take advantage of this opportunity. Stay well and be where you are. Just stop. And then, when you're ready, ask for help. And maybe somebody will show you something brand new. And you'll realize that even though you've got to stay in your 2-room flat or bed sit, right, something is happening anyway. You are connected.
And this place of stillness and stopping is a very big part of all spiritual paths, I feel. And sometimes we can lose ourselves in thinking that we have to go forward on a path. Again, this idea that we have to get to somewhere, or that eventually I'll just be so enlightened that I'll just be on this nice, smooth, path that will be more like a sort of conveyor belt that I can just sort of nicely sort of float along. And for me, paths are not smooth, and they're not really meant to be smooth. Hopefully, they're not to be meant to be incredibly difficult either, but a balance and a mix. And so being on a path means that sometimes you sit down and you don't move for a very long time, and that helps you to find yourself on your path again. You know, it helps you to really feel where you are and why you're on it, and again making this choice and commitment. We'll come to commitment in a little while more, but so wanted to say a little bit more about these different stages. So now we talked a bit about the stage of being still, and the stage of going back to the beginning. A few other stages that we've experienced, just that we want to share, because it can be good to recognize them. Because for me, everything is part of the path. It's not like, oh my God, now something's happening, so I'm off the path. No, it's all the path. It's all the path. So all I got to do is just stop and say, okay, so how is this part of the path? What's this really teaching me? And one very common thing is to get lost, right? Oh my God, I think I wandered off somewhere. I didn't notice when I did it, and now I have no idea where I am, and how on earth am I going to get back? Because I don't know where the path is, and I don't even know what it is anymore. And this feeling of being lost can also be very scary, and it can be exhilarating and wonderful, because it can be the moment when all else falls away and you're just naked and real with yourself and with the spirits, and you have to stop and you have to look around, and you might discover some new things, you know, and maybe this is encouraging you to actually look around more of you and see, well, where is it then? What's happened? And why do I feel lost? What is it that I lost? And what is it that I long for? These are wonderful questions to try and remember that I am still on the path, even when I might think that I'm not on it.
It's a wonderful story. You know, sometimes you get incredible teachings when you're not expecting it. I bought a wonderful book years ago, uh, Indian Sign Language. Of course, they were talking about North American Indians. And uh, it's a Dover paperback. They have a lot of wonderful ones. Anyway, so there was a little story in the beginning. It was a book that was written for Boy Scouts, I think in the 1920s or something like that. And the story was that this Boy Scout is out with his father, and they are lost in the woods when an Indian comes by, and they say something to him in English, and he looks at them with a very blank expression. And the little Boy Scout says to his father, maybe he knows sign language. And so the little kid makes some signs, and because the father says, tell him we're lost. And so the kid goes, and the Indian looks at him, and then he signs back. And the father says, what did he say? And the little boy says, he says, you are here. How can you be lost? And this is, we forget where we are. This is when we're lost, right? This is when we forget where we are, or maybe we don't know where we are. And this is the time to stop and see where we are. I have a calligraphy in the next room by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it says, I have arrived. I am home. Right? And I put these two stories together when I'm feeling lost. I put these two stories together.
And it's about arriving home in every moment.
In every moment. Yeah. And we forget we're human beings. We're busy. But we are. And where is home? For people who do shamanic work, that's our path, right?
So I want to talk about one more stage
Mm-hmm.
to make sure we have time for that,
Oh
and
my
that is
gosh.
the the stage when you might lose hope, you might lose faith, and you might lose trust. And maybe your relationship that had been like that is beginning to be challenged, shall we say. And this is not something that happens necessarily because we did something wrong. This is something that happens on any spiritual path. And I decided many years ago that actually for me, it didn't feel right to think of the spirits testing me. You know, a lot of people talk about this. They're testing you to see if you'll pass or fail, you know. And I thought, actually, it doesn't feel like that. I feel like what they're doing is they're opening their hands to me and saying, go on then, jump, jump, come on, we're waiting, jump. And they're waiting to see how I've received all the teaching. You know, there comes a time when we have to jump, we have to take a leap of faith, because otherwise we'll just be going along in school all the time. And it's great to be in school while you need to be in school. And then there's a point where you grow up, and you also have to grow up shamanically or spiritually, where you start to really take responsibility for your practice and your life. And so I feel they're not testing me, they're not trying to trick me or like catch me out. They're really trying to help me to come to the next uh, part of the journey, right? And then I just have to remember even more to ask for help. And that might be take a long process, and that can be even harder if I'm on shaky ground and I've sort of lost my faith a little bit in myself or the work or the spirits or a relationship. So then go back to the beginning. Stop trying to do really big stuff. You know, just go back to the beginning. Sit around the sacred fire with your spirits and talk to them and listen to them and be a child again for a little while. And then when you feel ready, stand up on your own 2 feet and ask them for help and support and guidance and wisdom. And we're always going to come to these places. There's no way you're going to go on a spiritual path and not have challenges. And as many of you have heard me say, the as far as I understand, the etymological root of the word crisis in Old Greek is a turning point. Originally, a turning point in an illness where we either died or the fever broke. So it's a turning point. So when I face a crisis or a spiritual crisis, this is a turning point for me in my path. And maybe I stop for a while and really think about what's happening here. What do I really want? Not just like, what do I wish would happen that isn't so difficult, but like, what do I truly want? And what am I prepared to commit to? And this is when I find that commitment ceremonies or small personal rituals where you again restate your commitment to your spirits can be very, very helpful. And you were talking before about this feeling of being imprisoned by surrender. And I think a lot of people also feel imprisoned by this idea that I've committed to something. Again, this kind of slightly bloated, naive dream of freedom, you know, as if that's the most important thing ever. Oh, I don't want to commit to anything, you know, because then maybe I won't be free anymore. Well, then you lose out a lot. So, what happens when I commit? Um, for me, a commitment is not a prison, not a lock that chains me to something, but it's something that I chose to do. If I really chose to do it and I took my time and I did it well, say, yes, I commit to you and you commit to me. Then when things start to get shaky, you know, and there's a bit of an earthquake, you know, we don't break free so easily. It reminds me when I'm tired or I'm fed up or I just think this is just too much, you know, I go back to that bedrock of commitment and say, oh yes, I remember now. I remember now why I do this. I remember why I'm here. I remember why I say yes. So I feel commitment ceremonies are there to help us make stronger in the times then where we may feel weak. Help us to remember in the times when it's easy to forget.
And they're all about surrender in this way that we were talking about surrender earlier, which is in fact stepping into power, right? And this is so important to remember. And we have to make decisions about how we want to live. And sometimes it can be very confusing. And in this case, in all cases, it's very handy to be able to work together with your spirits and to talk with them about these things. And sometimes they'll say, you have to commit, right? You take the beautiful crafts people who can take raw materials and create something just so exceptional and exquisite, as we were talking about earlier, artists, musicians, you know, all these people, right? So much of their life has been committed to doing this. And who only knows what they have been experiencing as they have been making these creations, or rather, perhaps allowing these creations to flow through them into the material. So, part of it is acknowledging and recognizing the undeniable fact that you are a part of the earth and celebrating that connection, celebrating the power that that gives to you, celebrating the power that they give to you that you can use to give back to them, right? You remember the spring, the spiral, right? It's the same thing. And several of you in the beginning of our talk, you mentioned this wonderful word, love. This is it. You know, love the world and love yourself. Step into power.
And there's a wonderful question here in the chat. If it's possible to send a message to my spirits, even if I don't know them. And this is a beautiful question because maybe we're right at the beginning of our conscious shamanic path, or maybe we long for it, you know. And we both feel, I think, that when you actively step into this work, it's really good to have a good human teacher or good human guide who can really guide you a bit in the first few years, and until you sort of ready to hold the power and understand the language. So it's good not to necessarily go all out yourself, but you can do some beautiful things. And one thing that I like very much is to write a letter. You know, remember, like some of you maybe have experienced when you were young, you got to write a letter to Santa Claus round about this time and tell them what your wishes were.
Tell him.
Yeah, and and then send it off, you know, up north somewhere. And so this is actually something you can do with the spirits too. You could just write a letter. You can say, "Dear spirits, I know we haven't met yet, and I'm not sure how we're going to meet, but there is a part of me that really longs to get to know you. And until that day, here are some things that I'd like to tell you about my life, or about um, what I wish for in meeting you. And just write truly from the heart. Don't write like a shopping list. Oh, I want the train, and I want a pony, and I want, all these things. Just write the things that really mean something to you, and then send it off. You can do wonderful things to send it off. You can be creative and have fun. You can, like they used to in the old days, put the letter in a bottle and send it off into the ocean. You can actually post it and put some interesting crazy address. It's like, it can be really fun. Or you can post it to yourself if you want to. I know someone who does this. You can post it to yourself, and then you'll receive it in the post. How wonderful! A message from the spirits. Or you can do a little ceremony where you have a candle in a bowl or a fireplace, and you ceremonially burn it, not to get rid of it, but to let it rise up in the smoke and take your wishes to the spirits. But only do this if you really feel like you'd like to get to know them, because they might hear you. And but it's a wonderful way to just begin to speak to them. Like maybe you can have them as a pen pal for a while until you get to meet them for real.
And this is really very wonderful advice, and there are other ways as well.
Many ways.
Many ways. And one of the things that I really recommend people is that if you're taking a walk and you're feeling stuck about something in your life, right? And you're walking along, maybe in a park in the city, and happened to me a few weeks ago. Walking around, I was thinking about something, and my eye was caught by a leaf that was marked in all different kinds of colors. And it just happened to be falling from a tree right in front of me, just as I walked there. And so I stopped and I picked up this leaf and I said, "What is this leaf telling me? What is this leaf telling me about what I'm walking along being worried about?" And people who practice shamanism know that everything has a spirit or a soul. Right? You can use whichever word is most comfortable for you. And so you look at the leaf and you say, "What are you telling me, leaf? What is your message to me?" Right? And then listen. But listen with your entire being. Don't just listen with your mind or your eyes or your ears, right? Or your skin, but listen with all of that and more. Right? Listen for the answer. Listen for the answer. Or maybe you're walking past a tree and you notice the tree seems to have an eye. Right? Say hi. Hi, eye. Right? What can you tell me about this? Right? Recognize that the world around you is alive. And when you see something that brings just the slightest glimmer of joy to your heart, even on that rainy day when you're feeling down so low, and all of a sudden there's something, it makes you smile. Oh, look at that. Receive the message, receive the power. Right? And pretty soon you'll start to be aware of those spirits who are reaching out to you.
And I think for me, more and more, as I journey through life, what I really love the most is just to be really fully alive. in the fully alive world. And I feel that when the time comes and we leave our physical bodies, we'll be going on another journey. But while we're here, certainly my wish is to be as fully alive as I can on the earth at this time, and meet everything in as fully alive a way as possible. So it doesn't have to be, a spiritual path doesn't have to be something bigger than that in a way. I mean, that's pretty big in itself. And we're going to finish off very soon, but I just want to say a couple more things. And that is that don't push your path. Don't try and get somewhere. Don't think that you need to achieve certain stages, you know, to be able to have a great practice. It's all just going round and round and round and round and round and round and round anyway. So enjoy it. And if you find yourself on a threshold, that moment when you're going to leap over and you might need to stop or walk back a few paces, that time of initiation of new beginnings, you know, just take your time and ask for help. You don't have to push your way through it. You can just sit with it for a while and let the path develop at its own pace. Having said that, you know, you don't need to back off either. You know, just be with it and let it develop in its own pace. Everybody's paths are different, you know. So there is a lot more information on other of our YouTube talks about shamanic practice in general, and also on our website shamanism.dk. There are lots and lots of
What is the website?
www.shamanism.dk.
D as in Denmark.
DK as in Denmark.
Oh.
There are a lot of free articles. And if you read some of the course descriptions, you'll actually find lots of questions that you can use as journey missions or medicine walk missions, if you like. So yeah, and I hope that we're gonna definitely continue to run some online courses next year, and definitely some ones that are open for everybody that will work more with nature work and ceremony. It's such a simple and powerful way to work. So, but what would you like to say, Jonathan, as we begin to wrap up about being on a spiritual path, this path that we've been on together here tonight?
Remember that you're alive. Remember that you're alive and the whole world is alive. And we're all connected. And that means that you can reach out to the world, because at least some of the world is reaching out to you. And just let the power flow through you.
And start where you are right now, because maybe this is a beautiful part of the path that you're on right now. Maybe you just have to stop and become more aware of it, and become more fully where you are before you need to take another step.
Be at home on your path.
Mm.
And thank you for being here tonight.
And let your path be your home.
Mm.